What's life like these days in Gaza? In October of last year, the first phase of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas went into effect. And at the time, there was a sense of relief. The remaining Israeli hostages being held by Hamas since October 7th were released, and there was a sense of hope that the daily destruction in Gaza might end. But in the months since, with Venezuela, then Iran, not to mention Lebanon, President Trump, his diplomats, and frankly the world's attention have all been diverted elsewhere. So what does that mean for the people in Gaza and the international pressure for a lasting ceasefire? From the BBC in London, I'm Asma Khalid, and welcome to The Global Story on YouTube. So the other day we got a message from a listener of our show. Randolph, he emailed us at theglobalstory@bbc.com with an idea.
I was wondering whether it might be possible for you to make an episode about the current situation in Gaza and what lies ahead. It seems international attention has shifted away from Gaza. That's why I would really appreciate an episode exploring the current situation there, the daily lives of civilians, and the latest development regarding the second phase of the ceasefire.
Well, thank you for messaging, Randolph. You asked, and we here at The Global Story try to deliver. And so to help us do that, I've called up my colleague, the BBC's Yolande Knell, a Middle East correspondent who's in Jerusalem. Welcome to the show. Welcome to The Global Story.
Hi there. Good to be with you.
Yolande, when the ceasefire was first announced, it seemed like there was relief amongst many Gazans. I recall hearing that at the time. Now here we are having this conversation more than 6 months later. And I just want to begin with a really broad question, which is, what is life like now after some of that initial relief died down and some of the world's attention has indeed shifted away?
To tell you the truth, Asma, important to begin with, say out there that, this is not a full ceasefire that has been in place for the past just over 6 months. And according to the Hamas-run health ministry, more than 760 Palestinians have been killed in the course of this last period of time. And that brings us to more than 72,000 people, the number who have been killed since the deadly Hamas attacks on Israel on the 7th October 2023, which triggered the war in the first place. And what we're hearing from people on the ground is just dire in terms of the humanitarian situation. It's been a really harsh, wet winter. People are still living in these makeshift tents. They haven't managed to get in the caravans that people were hoping for. And they're telling us that there are problems with the sewage systems. There are now these infestations of rodents, of rats, and people saying there are outbreaks of scabies. Thousands of people waiting to leave Gaza to go for medical treatment overseas. Although the Rafah crossing with Egypt is open for some of those medical evacuations, you only get a trickle of people who are going out.
Yeah, I was going to ask, one of the key aspects was that more humanitarian aid would get into Gaza. Has that happened?
One of the complaints of aid agencies saying they're still missing a lot of key equipment. There's not enough equipment to remove the rubble in Gaza. They're not able to get in sort of replacement parts for some vehicles and to fix infrastructure like for water and for sewage and for electricity. And that is because although that was promised as part of the initial stage of the peace plan, a lot of the individual items that they're asking for, Israel considers them to be dual use, meaning that they could be used by Hamas perhaps to, for reconstruction materials to rebuild their tunnels or whatever. So that is an ongoing difficulty. Aid agencies are still having a lot of difficulties, as we've covered in recent months, when it comes to access to Gaza. Journalists are still not able to go into Gaza from outside. The Israeli authorities are not allowing that. We've got an ongoing court case to challenge that. You see in the footage that markets do have food, that private merchants are able to bring in large amounts of food, so that the markets look much more well stocked than they did at certain points during the course of the war. But what people are saying is, of course, prices are high and it's very hard for most people. Work is hard to come by, and many people just can't afford those basic goods.
Yolande, I know that your team has been out on the streets in Gaza speaking to people for the Global Story. Can you give us a sense of where they went and what all you asked them, what you heard?
So we asked one of our regular freelancers in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza to go out and speak to people and ask them how their lives have changed since the October ceasefire came into effect. And actually what we heard from many of them is quite depressing because, they're saying that they have not seen the hope for improvements in their living conditions.
Nothing has changed. Everything is as it was. The shelling is still ongoing and prices are still high. Everything remains the same. Nothing has changed.
It's much harder than before. There is no life. My child wakes up at night and keeps scratching because of mosquitoes, fleas, weasels passing by, or rats. There are insects everywhere.
And there's a lot of uncertainty about where things are going, and that's been caused by the Iran war as well, and regional attention really sort of being diverted away from Gaza.
The Iran war has not changed anything. In fact, it has made the situation worse for us. Goods have decreased. The Iran war has driven prices up and caused even more shortages. It has not brought us peace or anything new. Rather, the situation has deteriorated further.
You alluded there to the fact that the Iran war has changed the situation in Gaza. How would you say so?
There are some immediate ways in which it affected everybody's lives in terms of inflation. So prices went up for just foods in the market. And we actually spoke to some small business owners, and they're saying one of the issues they were having is that the war actually caused a lot of disruption inside Israel, where they're having to import goods from, and transportation became much more difficult because of the Iranian attacks that were taking place. And so that led to disruption of supplies going into Gaza. That pushed up the prices. We've also had NGOs talking about how because they are buying their foods in Gaza and using fuel there as well. They're saying that the cost of all these going up also made them sort of less able to sort of meet the needs of people. And you now have in the region, just not very far away, another humanitarian catastrophe really sort of demanding attention as well, diverting attention away from Gaza. When you look at what's happening in Lebanon, with more than 1 million people displaced by the fighting between Israel and the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah. And at the same time, I would say just resources and attention have shifted too, because a lot of the key players in this region, Egypt, Turkey, and then the Gulf Arab states, they were all caught up in the last 6 weeks or so in dealing with the situation with Iran. And of course, in the case of the Gulf Arab countries, they found themselves on the front lines of this war.
I've been reading in some of your reporting, some of our colleagues reporting there in the region, that Hamas has been reasserting control in Gaza. How do you all see that showing up? Are there, is that happening in the form of territory gains or territory regains? Is that happening in the form of police and security controls? How are you seeing Hamas reasserting control?
I mean, this is something that people that we work with in Gaza have been telling us is very visible, that you start to see Hamas policemen on the streets patrolling, and that after 9 o'clock at night, there are often these checkpoints that are set up where people are stopped. We heard from business owners that Hamas is also putting taxes onto some services as well as basic goods in order to gain some funds. And it does really seem that Hamas has been using this moment with attention diverted elsewhere to reassert its authority. And we're also hearing of municipalities and ministries, Hamas trying to get its services back up and running again, to kind of show to people that it remains there as a force to be reckoned with, just at this very sort of tricky stage when international actors are putting pressure on Hamas to disarm for the next stages in President Trump's 20-point peace plan, to be advanced.
And how much of the territory in Gaza does Hamas currently control? I mean, my understanding is that when Israel came in, they also do maintain control of a vast amount of Gaza as well.
So yes, under the terms of this peace deal, Israeli troops withdrew, but they're still controlling something like more than half of the Gaza Strip. They've set up what's been called like this yellow line inside Gaza, and that is, you know, the north, the south, and the edge of Gaza where it neighbours Israel. And then, you know, Hamas is largely sort of in the other sort of towns and cities, the densely populated places where you find most of the 2 million population of Gaza living right now. They're less sort of, you know, obviously visible before. They were basically, you know, the government of Gaza, but they are still there, very present. And what we hear from people also is that continuing to pay thousands of workers who were working for them in sort of different government roles, they're still getting sort of at least partial salaries.
So they still have some of the infrastructure, you're saying, some of the political infrastructure there as well.
Indeed, and it looks like they've also been trying to sort of recruit more of these Hamas police officers in recent weeks. And it's very much Hamas police who have been a target of Israeli airstrikes we're talking about, with although civilians have also been killed in recent weeks. You know, Israel says it's targeting Hamas. It's going after both commanders of its military wing who are still there, but also very often we hear about, you know, groups of police who have been targeted.
Are people speaking to you openly about Hamas? I mean, you say that they are reasserting control. Do you have any sense of whether the group is popular amongst the population there?
Certainly what happened after the start of the war is we had a lot more people, you know, vocally coming out, criticising Hamas for its actions in Gaza, people blaming Hamas for the dire state of affairs, as well, of course, as Israel. And, you know, polls suggested a real drop-off in support, particularly in Gaza, among the Palestinian population there. Now, people are now in a position, I would say, of being less able to be sort of vocal about what they think of Hamas. That's the sort of sense that I'm getting when I'm speaking to people that I know there. But, you know, at the same time, they will, of course, have their supporters, people still in place who have stuck by Hamas, who are aligned with them ideologically.
I recall when the ceasefire was first announced, there were 3 phases of this deal. And in January, we heard President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, announce the start of phase 2. Can you remind us exactly what that means and whether or not, in fact, all the parties here are in agreement about whether we are indeed in phase 2?
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, loosely speaking, the first stage of the ceasefire was when the Israeli hostages were being released in exchange for Palestinian prisoners and detainees being released by Israel. And of course, you know, that happened. It was a slow process to get the return of all of the bodies of deceased Israeli hostages, but finally that happened. And then it was supposed to see also, as we mentioned, the resumption immediately of full aid to Gaza. One of the criticisms of Palestinians and of Hamas as a party here is they say that there has not been that full aid that was promised, and in particular to rehabilitate the vital infrastructure in Gaza. The second stage of the peace plan was really supposed to be moving into the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip and seeing this technocratic committee, Palestinians going in to govern Gaza day to day. They're an independent group. As yet, they have not gone into Gaza to take up their role.
So that technocratic committee is not at all in Gaza? Okay.
Exactly. It exists, but it's not in Gaza on the ground. And there's also supposed to be at this stage an international stabilization force to work with that committee. Now, countries were slow in coming forward to join up to that, but we have heard that there's been, you know, commitments from a handful of countries, Indonesia in particular, that they will send troops to be part of that force. They're not there yet either. What you do have is this civil military coordination center in the south of Israel, not far from Gaza, where they have been to visit there, and they have this, you know, huge screen where they can see on the ground what's happening in Gaza in terms of trucks going in. They can use, you know, satellite pictures to sort of zoom in and see what's happening. You have troops represented from different countries around the world, not just those who are saying they're going to go in there on the ground, all trying to support this initiative, which is really US-led. There's a big Israeli military presence there as well. But at the moment, on the ground in Gaza, those forces have not gone in. And so we're not seeing really, the momentum to kind of carry things through into the next stage. And the third stage, which still seems far off, is supposed to deal with kind of reconstruction of Gaza on a large scale, a sort of conditions written in there, very conditional sort of points in President Trump's plan about acceptance of Palestinian self-determination as well, and a pathway to recognition of Palestinian statehood.
So when we hear the Trump administration talk about the fact that we are now in phase 2, is that a reality on the ground? And does Israel and Hamas see this as being part of phase 2?
I mean, it's pointed out that there are still these issues related to phase 1 that have not been resolved, but you get the sense very much that the important players here want to move on to phase 2. Hamas really, having accepted that this technocratic committee would come in to Gaza, now is, as I've said, trying to kind of reassert its authority. You can see there's a real conflict of interest going on there. One of the other things that's happening is that Egypt and Jordan, as supporters of the whole process, have been training up thousands of Palestinian police officers, new police officers that are supposed to be going into Gaza. And as I mentioned, Hamas has been sort of getting its own police officers, even new recruits out there on the streets in Gaza. So that is a real issue. And the thorny issue for this stage is really about Hamas disarmament. It's been said from the beginning that was going to be a big, complicated, difficult subject, and that is definitely proving to be the case. What the head of the Board of Peace, its special representative, or its high representative, I think is called, Nickolay Mladenov, has been saying is that he has drawn up a comprehensive framework working with the technocratic committee for Hamas disarmament, saying that will lead ultimately to reconstruction, to the Israeli troop withdrawal from Gaza that people so desperately want to see.
Nickolay Mladenov, he seems really key to this US-led effort, this Board of Peace. Who exactly is he?
He's actually quite a familiar face in these parts. He's somebody who's originally the Bulgarian foreign minister, had roles in Europe before going to work for the UN, and then he had a UN position in Iraq, and then he was here in Jerusalem working as the special coordinator for the Middle East peace process, I think is the proper title. And he was here at a crucial time from just the aftermath of the 2014 war in Gaza to sort of try to coordinate reconstruction. So he went into Gaza several times. He was actually seen, when he finished his role after a few years, as being somebody that the Israelis and the Palestinians could work with, somebody who was quite pragmatic. At that time, I have to say, I interviewed him quite frequently. He was very accessible, but unfortunately, he's not been so accessible since, because I think there's so much going on where they think it's just not helpful to open up to media scrutiny and to further public scrutiny, that he's kind of working quite quietly at the moment, trying to get things done.
What's the hang-up specifically around the issue of disarmament?
So, I mean, first of all, you get those within Hamas who will point out that, there are these Israel-backed militia on the ground in Gaza. They have their own enemies. So when it comes to small arms, there's a lot of resistance in giving those up. But what Nickolay Mladenov said when he was speaking to the UN Security Council recently, updating them, is that in the framework that he saw, it would basically be Hamas giving up, first of all, its rockets, its explosives and assault rifles, the kinds of weapons that Israel, of course, sees as being the biggest threat. Of course, for Hamas, this is also about power. We're starting to hear a lot more resistance from members of Hamas when it comes to going ahead with this next stage. They've criticised Nickolay Mladenov a lot. They had a meeting with him and with US officials just recently in Cairo, we understand, although there weren't, big statements afterwards. But what the BBC heard from its sources is that Hamas really rejected this framework that Nickolay Mladenov has put forward. What they have said publicly, some Hamas leaders, they're accusing him really of working in Israel's interests, trying to sort of change the terms of the original ceasefire deal. And things do really seem to be at the moment at this really sort of critical stage, and they appear to be stuck.
You mentioned that Hamas has had some criticism of this envoy, Mladenov, of his plan, that they seem skeptical of it. What is Israel's viewpoint?
I mean, Israel has been very clear that Hamas has to be disarmed. Otherwise, it will disarm Hamas, meaning that it will renew its military offensive in Gaza against Hamas, that the war there could basically restart. And that is one of the reasons why people in Gaza are so worried. I mean, the Americans have actually picked up some of the same phrasing from the Israelis as saying that, if they don't agree, then they'll have to be made to give up their weapons, that demilitarization of Gaza will happen regardless. So, I mean, the stakes really are very high at the moment. And one of the other considerations is, of course, that as Israel may, under sort of US pressure, Iranian pressure, as there's moves for a sort of wider regional peace deal, that Israel's military may turn its attention back to Gaza more, and that could see sort of, new military offensives there, more airstrikes. That's certainly something that people have been saying that they're worried about and that they're mentally trying to prepare themselves for.
Yolande, we're having this conversation more than 6 months after the initial ceasefire deal was announced. And I really do recall at that moment, there was a sense, maybe it was too early, but there was an initial sense, it felt, of hope that, the sort of daily strikes were stopping, that something might change here. And now we're having this conversation in the context of so many of the headlines, so many of the stories shifting away and focusing on Iran, focusing on what's going on elsewhere, say in Lebanon. What's your sense of what's next for Gaza? And whether that immediate sense of hope still exists?
I mean, a big fear for people is going to be, is there that kind of money there still that was being talked about, Arab countries, giving millions of dollars in terms of reconstruction, when they now have to, rebuild some of their own infrastructure that has been under fire over the past, more than a month now. And then, on top of that, is the Trump administration going to sort of, be focused on other things, even in the Middle East, besides Gaza? And obviously it is that sort of, very personal involvement of key officials in the Trump administration that has helped to sort of push things through, helped to advance them up to now.
I've been wondering that very point. We see big U.S. players like Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, who are now very involved in other talks as it pertains to Iran. And you've got to wonder, when those senior figures, very trusted by President Trump, are not really as focused on this all, what that means when the attention and the dynamics change.
Yeah, I mean, because they laid out whether or not it was realistic, a lot of people were debating that at the beginning of the year. But, it's not so long ago that they were laying out these grandiose plans for skyscrapers and rebuilding Gaza in quite a systematic way. That was that big meeting that followed on of, heads of state and senior officials for the Board of Peace, with President Trump presiding over that, and these pledges, big pledges of money to go towards reconstruction and efforts in Gaza. Even then, that seemed very sort of jarring when you looked at some of the pictures that were on the ground, have this sort of glittering event versus the kind of grim reality. But I think, people are very cynical after all that they've been through, after all the setbacks that they have had. But there are some things to find hope in, particularly in the last few months. There's sort of these big moves to get a couple of 100,000 caravans into Gaza so that people can live in those and start to improve their living conditions. You feel that, if some small things could happen, if attention does come back to Gaza in a more positive way, then things could progress. At the moment, there is also a lot of internal division, it seems, within Hamas itself. And, the Iran war has added to that, because there are leaders of Hamas who have spoken out very much in favour of Iran, caused other countries in the region that had previously hosted them, like Qatar, increased hostilities with them. And there's sort of lots of dynamics shifting. That's how it feels. I mean, in terms of what's next for Gaza, you really feel that there has been this lull in violence, and it's given people a glimpse of hope. And although, there are so many depressing pictures that come out, some of the most hopeful ones, some of the most inspiring ones I've seen are the pictures of children who are going back to school, restarting their education, having some structure once again in their lives, having, an ordinary sort of child's focus in their daily life beyond just sort of, survival, which is how it has felt for much of the past 2 years. If international attention can come back in this direction, it's quite sort of tantalising that there is a framework there to return to, and you just think that there is hope there for the future in these kids.
Well, Yolande, I know you need to run, so thank you so much, though, for sharing your reporting and your analysis with us.
Okay, thanks a lot.
And that's it for The Global Story on YouTube. Thanks, as always, for tuning in. And if you appreciated our episode, I should mention that our show, The Global Story, it's also available as an audio podcast. So you can find us every weekday on bbc.com or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.